My name is Nora Bellamy. I'm 29, and 3 days after I came home from the hospital with my daughter, I walked through my own front door expecting quiet, expecting to finally exhale after 9 months of waiting, a rough delivery, and 48 hours of almost no sleep. Instead, I found my in-laws already sitting in my living room like they'd been holding court for an hour. My mother-in-law, Denise, perched on the edge of the couch with her hands folded primly in her lap, my father-in-law, Roger, standing by the window with his arms crossed, studying me the way you study something you've already decided doesn't belong in your house. My husband, Caleb, froze in the doorway behind me. I remember thinking, why didn't he warn me they'd be here? Ivy stirred in my arms, 3 days old, completely unaware she had already become the subject of an argument she hadn't asked to be part of. Before I could even set down the diaper bag, Roger spoke, flat and rehearsed, like he'd practiced it in the car. "We're not putting the family name on a child that might not be his." The room went silent except for the baby's breathing. I felt cold in that specific way that starts in your chest and spreads down through your arms until your fingers go numb. I looked at Caleb, waiting for him to say something. He just stood there, jaw tight, staring at his father like he was trying to solve a puzzle handed to him too fast. Ivy smiled, not a kind smile, the smile of someone who had already won an argument in her own head. "Pack your things," she said, as if she were the one who lived here. I didn't argue. I'd learned a long time ago that arguing with people who've already decided you're guilty is like shouting into a closed room. The sound just bounces back and makes you feel smaller. So instead, I laid Ivy gently in her bassinet in the corner, walked to the kitchen counter, and picked up a plain white envelope the hospital had given me 3 days earlier. I hadn't even opened it. I'd planned to file it away with the birth certificate paperwork, unbothered, because I had never once doubted whose daughter I was holding. I carried it back into the living room and, without a word, handed it to Caleb. He looked at me, confused, then down at the envelope, peeling back the flap slowly. Inside was the paternity confirmation the hospital automatically runs alongside standard newborn screening whenever a father requests it for insurance or estate purposes, something Caleb had quietly asked for weeks before Ivy was even born. Not because he doubted me, because his own father had once, in passing, mentioned wanting proof for the family trust. Caleb's eyes moved down the page, line by line, and stopped. Something in his face changed. He looked up, not at me, not at the baby, but directly at his mother. The silence in that room shifted completely. It wasn't the silence of accusation anymore. It was the silence of someone realizing the ground had just cracked beneath her. Roger shifted his weight, suddenly unsure where to look. Denise's smile was gone. Caleb folded the paper back along its crease, slow and deliberate, and set it down on the coffee table between his parents, like a verdict placed in front of a jury that had already convicted the wrong person. "You need to leave," he said, quiet but somehow louder than any shout could have been. Roger opened his mouth to argue. Caleb repeated himself slower this time, each word its own sentence. Denise reached for the paper. Caleb placed his hand flat over it, and for the first time since I'd known him, I watched him choose me, choose our daughter without hesitation, without asking anyone's permission first. Roger cleared his throat, tried to recover some footing. It was just a formality about the family name. No one's accusing anyone of anything. Caleb picked the paper up again, walked it over to me instead of them, and said loud enough for the whole room to hear that the paternity had never been the real question that mattered that night. The real question was why his own parents had thought it was acceptable to ambush his wife 3 days after childbirth with an accusation they hadn't bothered to raise privately with him first. Denise tried to soften her voice. I was only protecting the family, protecting the trust. Did you ever once consider that what mattered was the woman standing in front of you, exhausted, still healing, trying to keep her hands from shaking? She didn't have an answer. She looked at Roger as if he'd rescue the moment. Roger just kept staring at the paper like it had personally betrayed him. I sat down slowly on the arm of the couch, Ivy still asleep against my chest, and for the first time since walking through that door, I let myself breathe. Caleb crouched beside me, hand resting gently on Ivy's back, and told his parents that effective immediately, they would not be coming to the house unannounced, they would not comment on his marriage, they would not be near his daughter until they understood the difference between being family and being a threat. Roger tried once more. We have rights as grandparents. Rights are earned through respect, not blood. Right now, neither of you has earned anything but distance. They left. The door closed with a finality that felt less like an ending and more like a boundary being drawn in permanent ink. For a long moment, Caleb and I just stood in the quiet living room, the lamp humming softly in the corner, and I finally let my tears come, not from sadness, but from the particular relief of a body that had braced for a blow that never quite landed the way I feared. Caleb apologized for not stepping in the moment his parents opened their mouths, admitted he'd been too stunned to react, and promised it wouldn't happen again. We didn't hear from Roger or Denise for almost 2 weeks. The silence felt like the healthiest thing that had happened to our family in months. It was during that silence that Caleb found something that changed the shape of the whole story. Going through an old filing box in his father's storage unit, retrieving some paperwork for the trust restructuring he'd started, Caleb found a folder from 8 years ago, correspondence between Denise and a family attorney dated the month his older brother Theo's first daughter was born. A near identical demand, a formality regarding bloodline confirmation before the child's name could be added to the family trust. A note in Denise's own handwriting referencing a quiet conversation she'd had with Theo's wife, Priya, that apparently ended with Priya and Theo cutting contact with the family less than a year later. Caleb had always been told Theo simply drifted after starting his own consulting firm. He'd never questioned it. Now he understood exactly why his brother drifted and exactly who had pushed him. He called Theo that same night. It was the first real conversation the two brothers had had in years. Theo, it turned out, had never told anyone the full story, partly out of pride, partly because Priya had asked him not to relive it. When Caleb explained what had just happened to Ivy, Theo went quiet for a long moment. "She did the same thing to us," he finally said, almost word for word. That was the moment this stopped being about one bad night and became about a pattern no one in the family had ever named out loud. Caleb didn't go to lawyers for revenge, he went for clarity. He and Theo, this time together, met with the family's estate attorney and had every bloodline verification clause quietly stripped from the trust documents, language that had been added by Denise years before either of their children were born, well before there ever was a paternity question to justify it. What had been framed as caution turned out to be a mechanism she'd built for herself, a way to hold grandchildren and their mothers on a leash of suspicion whenever she needed leverage. When Roger reached out months later requesting a meeting, Caleb agreed, on one condition, that it include a direct, specific apology to both me and Priya, not vague talk about misunderstandings. Denise and Roger showed up smaller than I remembered them, more careful with their words. The apology came slowly, awkwardly, but it cost them something to say it, which told me it was at least real. Priya was there too. It was the first time the two of us had ever really spoken. We didn't need to say much, we just recognized something in each other. Two women who'd been handed the exact same accusation years apart by the same person, and had both quietly assumed it had only ever happened to them. We didn't rush back into closeness after that. Trust doesn't rebuild in a single conversation. It rebuilds through small moments where people either show up the way they say they will or they don't. Slowly, Denise and Roger started showing up the right way, asking before visiting, speaking to me directly instead of around me, speaking to Priya the same way for the first time in nearly a decade. Ivy is older now, and she has no idea how close she came to growing up inside a fracture that had already happened once before to her cousin, in a different living room years earlier. But I know, Caleb knows, Theo and Priya know too, and somehow having found each other on the other side of the same story made all four of us steadier than we might have been without it. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you end up teaching you exactly who's willing to stand between you and harm when it matters. And sometimes the fullest picture of what happened to you only shows up once you find out you weren't the first. If this story reminded you of a moment you had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting yourself, I'd love to hear about it in the comments.